March 15th, 1983, Burbank, California. MGM Studios, Stage 7, 2:47 p.m. Dean Martin was on set filming a guest appearance for a TV special, a variety show, one of dozens he'd done over the years. Same format as always. Dean would sing a song, tell a few jokes, make it look effortless. The audience would love it. Everyone would go home happy. Except today was different. Today there was a new executive on set. Richard Walden, 42 years old, MBA from Harvard, 3 years with MGM. Rapidly climbing the corporate ladder, Richard had ideas, modern ideas, about how entertainment should work, about who was relevant, about who was past their prime. And Richard had decided that Dean Martin was past his prime. Dean was 65 years old, had been performing for 40 years, was still selling out shows in Vegas, still making albums, still a household name. But to Richard Walden, Dean was old news, a relic, washed up. The director called for a break. Dean walked off set. Heading toward his trailer, Richard intercepted him. "Mr. Martin, can I have a word?" Dean stopped, looked at Richard, didn't recognize him. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Richard extended his hand. "Richard Walden, VP of Programming at MGM." Dean shook it. "Nice to meet you." Richard got straight to business. "Mr. Martin, I've been reviewing the budget for this special, and I have some concerns." "What kind of concerns?" Dean asked. "Your fee," Richard said. "We're paying you $50,000 for this appearance. And frankly, I don't think that's justified." Dean's expression didn't change. "Is that right?" Richard nodded. "The demographics show that younger audiences aren't interested in your style of entertainment. The variety show format is dying, and performers like you, well, you're part of that dying format. Performers like me," Dean repeated. "Yes," Richard said. "No offense, but you're washed up. The glory days are over. We need fresh faces, modern acts, people who appeal to the 1835 demographic." Dean was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you worked in entertainment, Richard?" 3 years, Richard said proudly. 3 years, Dean repeated. "And in those 3 years, how many shows have you produced?" "I don't produce," Richard said. "I oversee budgets, make strategic decisions, ensure the company is investing in profitable talent." "Profitable talent," Dean said. "And you've determined that I'm not profitable?" "The numbers don't lie," Richard said. "Your last album sold 200,000 copies. Adequate, but not impressive. Your Vegas shows are selling out, but to an aging audience. The future of entertainment is youth, and you're not appealing to youth." Dean nodded slowly. "So you think I'm washed up?" Richard hesitated, then said, "I think you had a great career, but it's time to make room for the next generation." Dean smiled, a cold smile. "You know what? You're right." "What?" Richard said, surprised. "You're absolutely right," Dean said. "I am washed up. I've been doing this for 40 years. Same songs, same jokes, same routine. It's tired, it's old. It's exactly what you said. A dying format." Richard looked relieved. "I'm glad you understand, Mr. Martin. It's nothing personal. It's just business." "I understand completely," Dean said, "which is why I'm leaving." "Leaving?" Richard said. "The set?" "No," Dean said. "The show. I'm walking out." "You can't do that," Richard said. "We have a contract." "Sue me," Dean said. He started walking toward his trailer. "Mr. Martin, wait," Richard called after him. Dean didn't stop, kept walking. Richard ran after him, caught up. "Mr. Martin, please, be reasonable." "I'm being very reasonable," Dean said. "You said I'm washed up. You said I'm not worth $50,000. You said the audience doesn't want me, so I'm doing you a favor. I'm leaving, saving you money, making room for the next generation." "But we need you for the show," Richard said, his voice rising, panicking. "We've sold advertising based on your name. We've promoted you in all the materials. If you walk out, we lose millions." "Then you shouldn't have called me washed up," Dean said. He reached his trailer, started packing his things. Richard was sweating now. "Mr. Martin, I apologize. I spoke out of turn. I didn't mean, yes, you did, Dean interrupted. You meant every word. And you know what? That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But I'm entitled to walk away. Richard looked around desperately. The director had noticed the commotion. Was walking over. What's going on? The director asked. Mr. Martin is leaving, Richard said. Leaving? The director repeated. Why? Ask him, Dean said, gesturing to Richard. Richard's face went red. There was a misunderstanding. What kind of misunderstanding? The director asked. Richard called me washed up, Dean said calmly. Said I'm not worth my fee. Said the audience doesn't want me, so I'm leaving. The director looked at Richard, his face hard. You said what? It was a budgetary concern, Richard stammered. You called Dean Martin washed up, the director said, his voice incredulous. Do you have any idea what you've done? Richard looked confused. I was just being honest about the demographics, honest, the director said. You insulted one of the biggest names in entertainment on my set during my production. Because of demographics? The director turned to Dean. Mr. Martin, I apologize. This man doesn't speak for MGM. He doesn't speak for me, and he certainly doesn't understand what you mean to this industry. I appreciate that, Dean said, but I'm still leaving. Please, the director said, don't let this idiot ruin the show. We need you. The crew needs you. The audience needs you. Dean looked at Richard, then at the director. Tell you what, Dean said. I'll stay on one condition. Anything, the director said. He goes, Dean said, pointing at Richard. What? Richard said. You can't. I can, Dean said, and I am. Either he leaves this set right now or I do. The director didn't hesitate. He turned to Richard. Get out. But Richard started. Now, the director said, his voice final. Richard looked around, at the crew watching, at Dean Martin, at the director. But I'm an executive, Richard said. I have authority here. Not on my set, you don't, the director said. Get out before I call security. Richard's face was crimson. He looked at Dean. This is outrageous. I'm reporting this to the studio heads. You do that, Dean said. And while you're at it, explain to them why you cost MGM millions of dollars because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Richard stormed off, furious, humiliated. Dean watched him go, then turned to the director. All right, Dean said. Let's make a show. The director smiled, relieved. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Don't thank me yet, Dean said. I haven't performed. 2 hours later, Dean was on stage, filming his segment. He sang, he joked, he made it look easy, like he'd been doing for 40 years. The audience loved it, the crew loved it, even the director was impressed. When Dean finished, the applause was thunderous, genuine, not just polite, but real. After the taping, the director found Dean in his trailer. That was incredible, the director said. Thank you, Dean said, packing up his things. I mean it, the director continued. You proved that guy wrong, showed him exactly how washed up you are. Dean smiled. He didn't need proof. He needed humility. Did he get it? The director asked. Dean shrugged. Probably not. But he got fired. What? The director said. Richard Walden. He's fired, Dean said. How do you know? Because I made a call, Dean said. To who? To the studio head, Dean said. Told him what happened. Told him that Richard Walden called me washed up. Told him that I walked out. And told him that if Richard Walden is still employed tomorrow, MGM will never get another Dean Martin appearance. Ever. The director's eyes widened. You didn't. I did, Dean said, and the studio head agreed. Richard Walden is done at MGM. Dean finished packing, picked up his bag. The director was stunned. Mr. Martin, that man has a family, a career. So do I, Dean said, and he tried to destroy mine because he thinks he knows better, because he's got an MBA and 3 years of experience, because he looked at numbers on a spreadsheet and decided I'm irrelevant. Dean walked to the door, stopped, turned back. You know what the difference is between me and Richard Walden? The director shook his head. I've spent 40 years earning respect, learning my craft. building relationships, proving my worth, night after night, show after show, for 4 decades. Dean paused. Richard Walden spent 3 years in an office looking at demographics, and he thought that made him qualified to judge me, to dismiss me, to call me washed up. So now he's going to learn what washed up really means. Dean left. The next day, Richard Walden was called into a meeting with the studio head. He thought it was about Dean Martin, about the incident, about how they were going to handle Dean's walkout threat. Instead, he was fired. Effective immediately. Security escorted him out of the building. He was given 30 minutes to clear his desk. His access was revoked. His name was removed from the directory. And just like that, 3 years of climbing the corporate ladder, gone. Richard tried to find work at other studios, but word had spread. Dean Martin had made it clear Richard Walden was toxic, unemployable, a liability. Nobody wanted the man who'd called Dean Martin washed up. Nobody wanted to risk their relationship with one of the biggest names in entertainment. For a 42-year-old executive with an MBA and a bad attitude. Richard's career in entertainment was over. He ended up in real estate, selling houses in the valley, making a fraction of what he'd made at MGM. And every time someone recognized his name, every time someone said, "Weren't you the guy who called Dean Martin washed up?" Richard had to relive it, had to remember, had to face what he'd lost. Years later, in 1995, a reporter asked Dean about the incident, about Richard Walden, about whether he felt bad about destroying the man's career. Dean thought about it, then said, "No, I don't feel bad." "Why not?" the reporter asked. "Because he didn't just insult me," Dean said. "He insulted everyone who'd ever bought a ticket to see me, everyone who'd ever listened to my music, everyone who'd ever laughed at my jokes." He looked at numbers on a page and decided that all of those people, their opinions, their loyalty, their support, it didn't matter, because they weren't in the 1835 demographic. Dean paused. "And that's worse than calling me washed up. That's calling my entire audience irrelevant. And I couldn't let that stand." "Do you think he learned his lesson?" the reporter asked. Dean smiled. "I hope so, because if he didn't, he wasted a perfectly good career for nothing." "What lesson should he have learned?" the reporter asked. Dean thought about it. That experience beats theory, that loyalty beats demographics, that relationships beat spreadsheets, and that calling someone washed up doesn't make them washed up. It just makes you look like an idiot. The reporter laughed. "Do you have any advice for young executives like Richard Walden?" Dean nodded. "Yeah, respect the people who came before you. Because one day you'll be the one who came before. And you'll want respect too. And if you spent your career dismissing everyone older than you, nobody's going to give it to you." The reporter scribbled notes. "One more question. If you could say something to Richard Walden now, what would it be?" Dean smiled. "I'd say thank you." "Thank you? For what?" "For reminding me why I do this," Dean said. "Not for executives, not for demographics, not for people who look at spreadsheets and think they understand entertainment, but for the audience, for the people who show up, who buy tickets, who listen, who care. Because they're the ones who matter, they're the ones who decide if I'm washed up or not, and as long as they keep showing up, I'm not going anywhere." March 15th, 1983. The day a studio executive called Dean Martin washed up. The day Dean Martin walked off set. The day he made one phone call and ended a career. That day taught Richard Walden a lesson. That power isn't about titles or offices or MBAs. Power is about relationships, about respect, about 40 years of proving your worth, and that calling someone washed up doesn't make them washed up. It just makes you unemployed. Dean Martin performed for another 12 years until he retired in 1995. He sold out shows, made albums, appeared on TV, and every single time He proved Richard Walden wrong, proved that talent doesn't expire, that loyalty matters, that audiences decide who's relevant, not executives, not demographics, not spreadsheets. The people decide, and the people chose Dean Martin for 40 years, until the very end, until he decided he was done, not because someone called him washed up, but because he'd given everything he had to give, and that's how legends retire. On their own terms. Not because an executive said so, but because they chose to. That's power, that's respect, that's legacy. And that's something Richard Walden never understood, until it was too late.